The Listening Skill Blueprint. Welcome to this professional development session on the listening skill. In this video, we will explore a practical framework for teaching listening in primary and intermediate EFL and ELT classrooms. The main idea is simple. Effective listening lessons should not simply ask students to listen and answer questions. Instead, we need to understand how listening works, plan lessons in a clear sequence, and provide appropriate support at each stage. Our framework has three main goals. First, we will understand the cognitive process involved in listening. Second, we will learn how to plan listening lessons using a three-stage chronological structure: pre-listening, while listening, and post-listening. And finally, we will look at practical strategies and scaffolded tasks that teachers can apply immediately in their classrooms. So, let's begin by looking at what actually happens when students listen. Listening is active meaning-making. One of the most important ideas in teaching listening is that listening is an active process of meaning-making. Students are not simply receiving sounds through their ears. While listening, their brains are constantly trying to interpret what they hear. There are two important processes involved here: top-down processing and bottom-up processing. Top-down processing means that learners use their background knowledge, context, and expectations to understand what they hear. For example, imagine students see a picture of a supermarket before listening to a conversation. They may already expect to hear words such as shopping, food, price, basket, or cashier. Their previous knowledge helps them predict and interpret the message. Bottom-up processing works in the opposite direction. Learners decode the actual language they hear. They identify sounds, words, phrases, grammar, and how these elements combine to create meaning. For example, a student may hear the sounds in a sentence and gradually identify the words, "I need to buy some apples." Effective listening lessons need to activate both processes simultaneously. In other words, students do not simply hear and interpret. They hear, predict, connect information with what they already know, and then select the meaning that makes sense. This is why preparing students before they listen is so important. The three-stage framework. This brings us to the three-stage structure of the listening lesson. The three stages are pre-listening, while listening, and post-listening. Think of these stages as a journey. First, pre-listening activates and prepares learners. Then, while listening engages learners with the audio and helps them extract meaning. Finally, post-listening extends the learning and allows students to personalize and use what they have heard. The three stages therefore have three different purposes. Pre-listening is about activating and preparing, while listening is about engaging and extracting. Post-listening is about extending and personalizing. The important point is that these stages should work together. They should not feel like three unrelated activities. For example, if students listen to a conversation about shopping, the pre-listening stage might involve predicting what a family will buy. During listening, students identify the items they actually buy. After listening, students could role-play a customer and cashier. Notice how each stage naturally prepares for the next. Pre-listening sets the stage. Let's now look more closely at the first stage, pre-listening. Pre-listening sets the stage for successful listening. Its goal is to reduce cognitive load, activate background knowledge, and introduce essential vocabulary. However, there is an important warning here. Pre-listening should not become a long teaching session before the actual listening begins. The teacher's role is to prepare learners without doing the listening task for them. Useful teacher actions include asking prediction questions, showing visuals, and giving students a clear reason to listen. For example, instead of explaining every word students will hear, the teacher might show a picture and ask, "Look at this picture. What can you see? What do you think the family will buy?" Students might predict, "Maybe they will buy fruit. Perhaps they will buy milk. I think they will buy bread." Now students have a purpose. When the audio starts, they are listening to confirm or revise their predictions. The common trap is over-teaching vocabulary or turning the pre-listening stage into a lecture. Remember, the purpose is not to remove all difficulty. The purpose is to provide enough support for students to successfully engage with the listening. While listening guides the ear. Now we move to the second stage, while listening. This is where we guide students' attention and help them process the audio. A very useful principle is to move from gist to detail. The first listening should normally focus on the main idea, rather than requiring students to understand every word. For example, after the first listening, we might ask, is the speaker happy or worried? Or, what is the conversation mainly about? This gives students a broad understanding of the message. Then, during the second listening, we move to specific information. For example, write 3 things the boy bought. This is more demanding because students now need to extract specific details. The important principle is to scaffold the task from broad to specific. Students should not be expected to understand everything on their first attempt. Remember that audio may need to be played 2 or 3 times. But we should avoid constantly stopping the recording. If we pause after every sentence, students may become dependent on the teacher's interruptions rather than developing real listening stamina. Instead, give students a clear task, play the audio, and allow them to process the message. Also, avoid asking students to listen and answer a large number of questions simultaneously. Give them a manageable focus for each listening. Post-listening. Beyond the audio. After students have understood the audio, we move to the post-listening stage. And this is where many listening lessons stop too early. A common pattern is, students listen, answer comprehension questions, and the lesson ends. But listening should be a starting point for further learning. The goal of post-listening is to connect listening to productive skills, build language awareness, and personalize the topic. For example, students might discuss the topic with a partner. They might identify useful grammar or phrases from the audio, or they might use information from the listening to complete a speaking or writing task. Imagine the listening was about healthy habits. After listening, we could ask, work in pairs. Which healthy habit from the audio is most important for teenagers? Students then have to use what they heard as a springboard for communication. They might say, I think getting enough sleep is most important because teenagers need to rest. Another student might disagree. I think exercise is more important. Now listening has led naturally into speaking. This is the key principle. Go beyond the audio. Lesson diagnostics for common pitfalls. Let's summarize some of the most common problems teachers may encounter. For pre-listening, best practice is to keep the activity brief and use predictive visuals. For example, show a picture and ask students what they expect to hear. What should we avoid? We should avoid over-explaining the text or introducing too much vocabulary before listening. For while listening, we should use scaffolded tasks, moving from gist to detail, and we can play the audio 2 or 3 times when necessary. What should we avoid? We should not expect students to listen and answer everything correctly on the first attempt. For post-listening, we should explicitly connect listening to speaking, writing, or reflection. The mistake is simply skipping this stage because we want to finish the lesson early. So, when planning a listening lesson, ask yourself 3 questions. Have I prepared my learners? Have I guided their listening? Have I given them an opportunity to use what they have understood? These 3 questions can help us diagnose and improve our listening lessons. Applying the blueprint in primary classrooms. Let's see how this framework works in a primary classroom. Our example is grade 4, with the topic at the supermarket. During pre-listening, the teacher shows a picture of a shopping cart. The teacher might ask, what can you see? Then, what 3 things do you think the family will buy? Students make predictions. Next comes while listening. Students listen to the audio and have a clear task. Sequence the items bought in the order they hear them. Notice that the task is focused. Students are not required to understand every sentence. Finally, we move to post-listening. Students complete a productive activity by role-playing a customer and cashier. For example, can I have some apples, please? Sure. Anything else? Yes. I'd like some milk. This is an excellent example of how listening can lead naturally to speaking. The important point is that the 3 stages are connected. Students predict before listening, identify information while listening, and then use the language in a meaningful situation after listening. Applying the blueprint in intermediate classrooms. Now let's apply the same blueprint to an intermediate classroom. Our example is grade 7, with the topic healthy habits, using a teenager monologue. Before listening, the teacher introduces a few key concepts using words such as sleep, exercise, and screens. Students then predict the topics the speaker might mention. During the first listening, students focus on gist. The teacher asks, is the speaker generally healthy or unhealthy? During the second listening, students focus on detail. They write down 3 habits mentioned by the speaker. Then, during a third listening, students focus on language. They identify or underline phrases the speaker uses to give advice. Notice the progression: gist, detail, then language. After listening, students move into discussion. Which habit is most difficult for you? They then complete a writing task by writing 5 sentences giving advice to a friend. This demonstrates how one listening text can support several learning objectives without overwhelming students. The Classroom-Ready Activity Bank. We will provide a useful bank of activities that teachers can draw from when planning listening lessons. For pre-listening, we can use picture prediction, vocabulary matching, brainstorming, and a KWL chart. For example, before listening to a text about animals, students could look at pictures and predict which animals they will hear. For while listening, we can use gist questions, true or false, table completion, sequencing, note-taking, and spot the difference activities. The important point is to choose the activity according to the listening purpose. For example, if we want students to understand the general message, a gist question may be appropriate. If we want specific information, table completion may be better. For post-listening, we can use role play, debate, summary writing, reflection questions, vocabulary recycling, and project work. The key is not to use every activity. Instead, select an activity that supports the learning outcome and matches the stage of the listening lesson. Design a pre-listening task. Now let's put the framework into practice. Our topic is a trip to the zoo. The task is to design a quick pre-listening activity that activates background knowledge and reduces cognitive load. A strong example would be to show students pictures of animal shadows. Instead of telling students exactly which animals they will hear, we ask them to predict. Which animals do you think the speaker will mention? Students might say, I think it's an elephant, maybe a giraffe, perhaps a lion. This activity activates existing knowledge and creates curiosity. Notice that it is quick. We are not spending 10 minutes teaching animal vocabulary. We are simply preparing students to listen with a purpose. That is effective pre-listening. Create a while listening task. Now let's design a while listening task. The topic is a student describing her weekend. Our task is to create one highly effective gist question for the first time students hear the audio. A good question would be, did she have a busy weekend or a relaxing weekend? This is effective because it focuses students on the overall meaning. They don't need to remember every activity. They simply need to understand the general nature of the speaker's weekend. This is an important distinction. A gist question should answer, what is the overall message? It should not require students to identify small details. Once students understand the gist, we can move to more specific questions during the next listening. So, when designing your first listening task, always ask yourself, can students answer this question by understanding the general message? If the answer is yes, you probably have an effective gist task. Frame a post-listening task. Now let's move to the final stage, post-listening. Our topic is daily routines. The task is to design a speaking activity that extends comprehension and personalizes the topic. A suitable activity would be, work in pairs. Compare your daily routine with the speaker's. What is similar? What is different? This is effective because students are no longer simply demonstrating that they understood the recording. They are using the information to talk about their own lives. For example, one student might say, the speaker gets up at 7, and I get up at 6. Another might say, we both have breakfast before school. This is what we mean by moving beyond the audio. The listening text becomes a resource for communication. Building learner autonomy. Let's bring the whole framework together. The pre-while-post model does more than test comprehension. It teaches students how to listen. First, students become mentally prepared. The framework mirrors real-world listening by activating top-down processing before the audio begins. Second, students are guided with purpose. Bottom-up decoding is supported through careful scaffolding, moving from gist to detail. Third, students move beyond the audio. Listening becomes a springboard for productive communication through speaking and writing. This is especially important for learner autonomy. Our goal is not to create students who can only complete teacher-designed comprehension questions. Our goal is to help students become listeners who can approach real communication strategically. They learn to predict. They learn to listen for the main idea. They learn to focus on important details. And they learn to use what they hear to communicate. So, the pre-while-post model is not simply a lesson structure. It is a way of teaching students how to listen effectively and independently. Thank you for watching this video on the listening skill. I hope this session has given you practical ideas for making your listening lessons more purposeful, structured, and engaging. If you found this video useful, please like, share, and subscribe for more practical ideas and professional development resources for English language teachers.